Hello, I want to welcome you to this episode of AlzAuthors Live, When Dad Has Dementia. I'm Mary Ann Shuko, a co-founder and manager of AlzAuthors. We're the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. Thank you for sharing some of your precious time with us. I'd like to introduce some of the members of our management team who are here with us today. Jean Lee, give a wave, Vicky Tapia, and Ann Campanella. We do have some housekeeping. The event is being recorded, as you know, and we will post it to the YouTube channel so you can watch it again or share it with others who you think may benefit. If you don't want to be seen with the camera, you can turn off your camera, so you do have that option. Everyone is muted except for the panelists. If you would like to speak, you can raise your hand or else leave us a message in the chat box. In the chat box, if you would like, you could also say hello to everybody, maybe write where you're from. If you've written a book, you can put your book title in there, or if you're with an agency, you can put the name of your agency in there. We can save that and share that with you later. So please do that. And we're going to do a raffle where the winner will get a copy of one of the panelists' books, their choice. And we'll also send you a little later on a PDF of our new infographic, When Dad Has Dementia, featuring inspirational and informative messages from our authors. So you can look forward to that. I would like to introduce our panelists, Andrea Couture, who is the author of Embracing What Remains, a memoir. Irene Francis Olson, author of Requiem for the Status Quo, a novel. Patty Davis, author of Floating in the Deep End, a memoir and a caregiver guide, and Tanya Ward Goodman, author of Leaving Tinkertown, a memoir. So welcome, ladies. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure there's nobody in the waiting room, and I don't see anyone, so I think we're good. Okay. So we decided to do the topic for dads because, well, it's going to be Father's Day coming up. So we wanted to do something special for the fathers and the families for that occasion. So that's why we came up with this idea. And we have many, many books in our collection on caring for a dad with dementia. And we went through them and selected all of you for mainly based upon your story and the genre that you chose to write in. And we came up with a bunch of questions. I hope you had the chance to review and maybe think about some of them. And if you want to answer a question, you can just raise your hand and let me know or speak out, or, if you don't, that's fine. That's fine. It's too. We're going to move things along, and who knows what kind of a subject is going to come up next. And again, if people have questions, they can put them in the chat and we'll get to them too. So one of the things I wanted to discuss is what it's like to see your father in this new light after a dementia diagnosis, or maybe even when you're starting to suspect that things are kind of like not right with dad. What's going on with him? Because for many of us, our dad, he's that stoic, figurehead, the head of the family, somebody that we look up to and depend upon. And now all of a sudden things are starting to change. How did that work for you? Who'd like to speak first?
I will.
Go ahead, Patty.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think, in most families, I think the father is sort of the strong center of the family. I mean, certainly he was in my family. I remember when I was a little girl saying, my daddy can do anything. And I really believed that. So to see a disease come in and start to diminish that person is startling, I think, at first, and obviously is an invitation to start grieving right then, which I think is really important. I've written a lot about grief in Floating in the Deep End. I think you have to acknowledge that with this disease right at the beginning. But I think I think that the way to handle this disease is to remember there's always a different way of looking at things. You can look at your father as being diminished. You can look at him as being less than he was, or you can look at it, and that is a reality, but you can also look at it as being illuminating, that you get to know him better, because dementia, any form of dementia, is a stripping away down to that person's essence, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what their essence is. But even if it's a bad thing, you're learning something about that person. You know, it enables you to step back and look at them as a human being. I mean, I think one of the things about growing up is to realize that our parents were human beings before they became our parents. And as someone moves back in time with dementia, you get to see who they were before you were born, before you knew them, and you get to learn more about them. I mean, I saw the boy that my father was, the child of an alcoholic. I obviously knew he was the child of an alcoholic, but I saw how that impacted him as he moved back in time. And I learned a lot about him. I learned his vulnerabilities. I learned his kindnesses. I learned his sweetness that I sort of knew about, but I saw it. I saw it right in front of me. I wrote in Floating in the Deep End about him thinking that spots of sunlight on the floor were something that spilled there. And he got down on his knees. He was trying to wipe up something that spilt there so that somebody else wouldn't have to do it. You know, things like that. So I think you have the ability to see this person as a whole human being rather than as just in the box of your parent.
That's a very, very good point. Does anybody want to add to that?
I felt similarly when my father was first showing signs. He was an extraordinarily creative and eccentric person. So it was kind of difficult at the beginning to see that anything was different, because he was, you know, lived a kind of outsized life, and he was always making things and building things and walking around the house in various stages of costume. And, you know, so at the beginning it was, we really thought, well, is he just a little more erratic than usual? But it was difficult to sort of mark that down. But slowly the things that became, that had been, I think, ingrained in him, like he was an amazing map reader. He had traveled all over the United States as a first with the carnival and later as a carnival show painter. And so he had driven everywhere, and he just loved the atlas, and he would pore over the atlas and look at all these road maps. And I noticed right away that he was having a really hard time even just finding his way in our town in Albuquerque. And that was really surprising. And that he was sort of quick to anger, and that was really unlike him. He was not a very angry person. And so at the outset, there was this divide, and he got very quiet and kind of remote. And I think at that beginning, before I knew that what was really happening, it was incredibly lonely, because we had always sort of had this really deep connection, and all these little in jokes and all this kind of funny stuff that we would share. And that there was like a screen that went up. And then somehow, once we found out, once he got his diagnosis, and he was 57, so he was really young, and it was really a surprise. We knew what was going on, and we could kind of let things go. It wasn't like we were trying to go like, hey, no, that's not the right road, or this isn't the right thing. Once we knew, we were able to sort of just flow with, which gave him so much more comfort, and brought that screen down, so that we weren't always fighting with like, no, it's Tuesday, or no, that's that person that you know, or, you know, always correcting. It was like, whatever, we don't care. Eat as many ice cream sandwiches as you want. Like, yes, you know her, it doesn't matter. She knows what's going on. And then we got to reconnect. And so all those moments of creativity, like that part of him hadn't left. And it just kind of blossomed in more and wonderful and mysterious ways. And I think it gave us a lot of kind of as a family, a lot of strength to know that I don't know. I think we relied on that a lot, and it just, we saw that that part of him was really there, and he was always really funny, and he was always really, you know, he was constantly creating art and drawing and making things, and that didn't go away, and so we could kind of connect ourselves to it at any moment. Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Irene.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of times, well, this is what happened with my father. Depending on their personality, my father, part of my dad's personality was he was quite the jokester, humorous type of person. And I remember after attending the neurological workup with my dad, you know, when the doctor reported to me, you know, what was going on, I said, well, how come I didn't know this? And he said, your father is he has a really good sense of humor. And a lot of times people, whatever strength of their personality is, whether it's highly organized, a humorist, whatever, it masks the symptoms.
Right.
Yeah.
And so even though my father was diagnosed I think he was 80, 79 or 80, he was masking the symptoms. I don't think he was actively trying to mask the symptoms. It was just who he was.
Right.
So, you know, it's like, okay, now that I know what we're dealing with, like you said, Tanya and Patty, I mean, once you know what you're dealing with, then you know better how to respond and flow with it, because
Right.
you can't change it. So
No.
That's right.
Acceptance really comes into play, and acceptance doesn't mean you approve. It just means it is what it is, and therefore I have to flow with it. So
Yes.
it's very, very eye-opening, to be sure.
Incredibly. That recalibration that you do, and you have the power in that, is to decide like, hey, we're going to make this work, or we're going to, you know, shift things completely.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Andrea, what about you?
I would say that similarly, you know, I start to see my dad very differently. I mean, in my book and obviously in my life, I talk a lot about my dad was a doctor and then was only diagnosed 2 years after retirement. So much of my life with him, I didn't spend a lot of time with him, you know, personally. So once I finally got to, he was already heading down, you know, that dementia and Alzheimer's. And it was like I started to see him not just as a doctor anymore. Like to me, he was just so much a doctor. And then it just became, now he, like Patty said, now he's a human. Now he's a man. And that was stripped, you know, all those other things were stripped away from him. But over the last few, I want to say like year or two, even though my father has now passed away, I started to realize like how much of a blessing that was, that I got to know him in such a different way.
Yeah.
You know, I think if he had never gotten Alzheimer's, I don't know if I would have ever seen that same side of him. And in some ways I appreciate that, because I didn't just see him as that doctor, as that strong, you know, stoic figure. I got to know him in such a different way. And I actually really appreciate it. So much as it was hard to see my dad lose his skills, you know, mentally and physically, that emotional connection for us stayed really strong. Appreciate that.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, can I just add something?
Sure.
I mean, my father at a certain point forgot that he had been president of the United States. He didn't know why people recognized him when we were still able to take him out on walks, and, you know, and people would wave at him and say, hi, President Reagan, or however they addressed him, usually as President Reagan. And he would wave back and smile and be really nice. And then he turned to me and said, how do they all know me? So I realized he had no idea. And I said, well, you did some really important things in your life. I mean, I didn't want to, there's no reason to point out what he didn't remember. So
Right.
I sort of was vague
Yeah.
about it. But my takeaway, I mean, this is where it comes down to choice. My takeaway from that could have been, oh my God, he doesn't even remember what he did in his life. He doesn't remember that he was the
Right.
leader of the free world. But I chose instead that my takeaway was how nice he was to other people,
Mhm.
you know, who he didn't know why they were so friendly to, but he was being friendly back. And then sort of like secretively asked me, how do they all know who I am? How do they all know me? Right.
Right.
But his first instinct was to be nice to them in return.
Right.
So that was my takeaway from that, like what you were saying.
That's
Like you
Yeah.
said, Patty, that was his essence.
Yes.
Earlier you
completely.
said that. And so
Yeah.
that's his essence that is
Yeah.
coming through loud and clear.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Did he remember being an actor?
I don't know.
Mhm.
He remembered because, you know, people go back in time. There was a football game on television one day, and which my mother forbade after that, because he thought he played football in college, and he thought he was supposed to be in the game. He thought this was his
Oh,
team and he was
wow.
supposed to be there, and why are they there without him? And he was incredibly upset.
Mhm.
And this was early on, and no one knew how to. We didn't know how. Nobody knew how to deal with this stuff. I mean, now there are more skills. We have more skills, and more information is available. No one knew how to deal with that one, so like turned it off and forbade anyone to ever turn a football game on the television.
Gosh. Andrea, I have a couple questions for you that I think are unique,
Okay.
because I know that you were raising young children during your
Mhm.
dad's illness, and you also cared for your father during COVID. So could you
Yes.
share some of that with us?
Sure. I mean, do you want me to talk about the kid part first?
Yeah.
Or-
However you want to do it.
Well, I think something that's interesting was I was actually pregnant with my third and final child the year my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer, well, dementia first. I mean, I'd given birth a few months prior. And so, I was in a very vulnerable state at that point emotionally. And, my dad, I think, was trying to stay strong. I think he knew something was wrong. And I talk about my book, but, my baby had some issues in the beginning. And so my dad tried to help me through that, being a doctor or a retired doctor. So it was just interesting that once my son, everything was cleared up with him, my dad then kind of said, there's something wrong with me now. And it was just, and I know you talked about this earlier, it was just really interesting to watch my child grow and develop all these skills as my father lost all of them almost at the same time. My mom and I would discuss, Dad, didn't do this today. And I'd say, oh, well, Henry did, like, wow, that's, and we would just go back and forth. And it was just, and it's what drove me to start to write the book was these crazy parallels in my, in my life that I had to share. So, I mean, for a better word, they were almost like poetic to me, like it was this, I don't know, crazy thing. And then COVID hit. And my dad was really starting to decline at that point. And it became even more ironic to me because my father was a surgeon for so many years, right? For 40 years. And here we are all wearing masks around him. And he's wearing one because he doesn't understand. And he's like, why would I wear a mask? And it didn't even come up and so, I'm walking into the house and here I am, I'm Andrea. I've never been in the medical field. And here I am wearing a mask and some people are wearing gloves around him. It just felt like, Dad, see me? And then I was like, well, maybe he doesn't care. Maybe he's so used to seeing people with a mask on. Is he confused? Does he think he's in an operating? It was such a crazy time. And it just, I couldn't, and even at the end, as my father was dying and we were caring for him in his home, we would all put on gloves, we'd give him medication, we'd wear masks. And I was like, this is just so ironic, and I hope he's comforted. I hope he's not confused. And I wanted for so long to ask him, Dad, what do you think of this? I wanted his medical opinion, but I was never going to. So it was just such a crazy time, what a time to have, that kind of disease, just
untenable.
Yeah.
Pretty wild, yeah.
It's outrageous, really, the whole, what people endured through
Yeah.
and still in some cases.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because we just got pictures from one of the custom caregiver collections was delivered. It was in Minnesota, I believe, right? I think you saw it, Jean. And the people at the meeting were wearing masks, everybody. That was recent, that photograph.
Oh yeah.
Here in New York, we're not doing that anymore. So, in some parts of the country, I guess it's still very prevalent and people are still masking up as a rule.
Right.
So
I
I
still wear a
know.
mask every time I go in the grocery store.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So do I.
I absolutely do.
Yeah.
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 People are getting this. I don't want to get this.
They
Mhm.
sure
Yeah.
are. Yeah, it hasn't gone away,
true.
but
No,
for the most part, a lot of people are just choosing not to. So, but
Mhm.
yet families with vulnerable loved ones are still very cautious. And then with
Right.
the employment issues, it's very hard to find people to come to provide care or to staff
Mhm.
in the nursing facility. So there's all of that going on as well.
Mhm.
So let's talk about becoming a caregiver, because that's not a role that I think anybody aspires to. Nobody says when they're growing up or in their early years, gee, someday I hope I get to be the caregiver for one of my family
Yeah.
members.
Right.
Right.
What happened, when you suddenly realized that you were called to that role or that you would be a part of the caregiving team? How did that affect you? Irene?
Well, in my situation, I live in Washington State. My father, who died in 2007, he lived in Southern Oregon, and I was the long distance caregiver. And whether you live 100 miles away or 1,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away, you become a long distance caregiver. So I never had to provide the hands-on care, but I had the challenge of being present, even though I couldn't be present. And mind you, what I did was this is when airfares were super cheap. I just bought Alaska Airlines tons and tons of flights to Medford, Oregon from Seattle area, and just change the dates as need be. And I would visit them at least once a month, and then that increased as well. But me going into the caregiver role, even though long distance caregiver, and when I went and visited them, I was there at least a week every time. I came into it with long-term care experience. I worked for a long-term care company that provided assisted living and memory care. I was not a CNA, a certified nurse assistant or anything like that, but I was a business manager for one of the communities that the company owned. And even though you have, and Marianne, I know you can attest to this, even though you have all that textbook knowledge, and even experiential knowledge, because I was with the residents every day, 5 days a week, it's different when it's your dad or your mom or your spouse. It's totally different. And I enjoyed my role as the caregiver, meaning I did not provide active caregiving like some of you have, and like, of course, the professionals did. But I could always walk away from it. When I left Dad from his facility to catch a plane to come home, I didn't leave him per se. I was still present in mind and heart, but I didn't have to do the hands-on. And this just brings about such a respect for those who do, whether as a family caregiver or a professional caregiver. Like you said, Marianne, no one's prepared for it. No one decides when I grow up, I'm going to be a caregiver for my dad who has dementia. No one has that goal in mind. But I guess to close out my deal as a caregiver is that even though I was a long distance caregiver and I visited all the time, I would just advise people to just be present. I don't mean just from a mindfulness standpoint, but to be visible so that you are known by the staff. If you're in a, if your loved one is in a facility, you're known by the staff, you connect with them, you show respect for them, and you do what you can to be an active participant in your loved one's care. So it's possible. That doesn't mean that you should be the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. That does not work, and it's not respectful. But it's just being present for your loved one, whether by email or texting or your physical presence, so that the staff knows you and knows your father or your loved one a little better. I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to be present so that you're a part of the team, even though you're not there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was reflecting on being the long distance caregiver myself, like earlier today. And I realized that by not being like there with my mom, not living in the house with her or being there every day, I really didn't have a lot of control over what was going on at the house. And when I would find out about the issues, by then they had exploded. You know, I'd get a text message or a call from somebody frantic about whatever it was that was going on. And that was really hard. Like, a lot of people might not think that the long distance caregiver is really the caregiver because they're not physically present, but there's so much else that goes on and so many things that you have to do. And it's sometimes worse to be like so out of the picture, really, you know, on that minute level. You know, my mother's live-in niece, she was there 24/7. So she was the one that did the heavy lifting, but I was always the one that whenever she was freaking out or something was wrong, you know, all of a sudden I'm getting that emergency phone call when I'm at work or, you know, and I can't do anything about it. You know, I hated that. Anybody else here do long distance caregiving? No? Or did your father live with you, or what was your role? Patty, what was your role?
Well, I was in New York at first when he was diagnosed, and I moved back to California. But, you know, he was diagnosed in 1994. So the word caregiver wasn't really that common a term then. I don't think I ever referred to myself that way or even thought of myself that way. But in retrospect, in terms of the concept, I certainly did, because from the beginning, I knew I wanted to show up. I wanted to be there. I wanted to go through this experience, whatever it was going to be. And there was very little information about it then. It was a disease no one was talking about. And sort of overnight, my family became the poster family for Alzheimer's, but no one was talking about it.
Right.
So, you know, I think certainly, like I said, in retrospect, I definitely was a caregiver because even though my parents could afford professional care, increasingly as time went on, and especially the last few years of my father's life when he was bedridden and he actually had to have nursing care, none of the professional caregivers have the history, the emotional history with that person that you as a family member do. And when I started my support group in 2011, there were people who came in sometimes and said, well, you know, my parent has Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia, but, you know, they're in Arizona and I'm not here, and I'm here. So I don't know that I'm really a caregiver. And, you know, I would always point out, yes, you are. If you're showing up, whether it's long distance or getting on a plane and going or what, if you're just present for this experience, you absolutely are a caregiver. That's an emotional reality for you and for your parent.
It's true.
So,
Yeah,
I was a little bit of both. When my dad was diagnosed, I moved home. I was living in Los Angeles and I moved home to New Mexico and moved into my old bedroom in my childhood home because I really wanted to spend as much time with my dad as possible, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And so I lived there with my family, taking care of my dad, along with my stepmother. She and I sort of took charge of everything. And I think originally I had these really beautiful visions of what caregiving would look like. Like she said, okay, you'll be in charge of meals. And I was like making these complicated Martha Stewart menus. And I was like, oh, we're going to have like a Hallmark movie. And really quickly we became, it was really clear that that is not the way this is going to go down. And I started making these vast quantities of, lasagna and giant pots of chili, and we just eat grilled cheese sandwiches and run around, because it was, I think what I expected and what was actually happening was really different. And in our situation, my dad's mom, my grandmother was diagnosed almost immediately after my father. And so we kind of were having my dad at home and then finding a place for my grandmother to be, and kind of watching everyone go through just a little bit ahead of each other. And so we kind of ran around so much. And I think as a daughter, that caregiving was particularly difficult the more my father progressed. I think there's a level of intimacy between a father and a daughter that at a certain point, I almost envied my stepmother and her ability to just grab him and throw him in the bathtub or pull him into her bed, or, it's just sort of like, it was so difficult to get past those. And then also you kind of lose your identity. I think my younger cousin looked a lot like me when I was about 9. And I think my dad's memory rolled back to that point. And I had very short hair at the time. And he was like, there's this angry man. Can we just get out of here? And my cousin was like, what are you talking about? And then later my hair kind of was growing. And he was like, oh, hey, what are you doing tonight? And I was like, that's not us either. Kind of like finding that place and constantly navigating like where the identity is. And so that was difficult. And I lived at home for about almost 2 years, 18 months. And then I moved back to Los Angeles because I had been seeing someone here, and I really understood that I wanted to start my own family. And then I became a long distance caregiver, and I would fly home at least once a month and kind of spell my stepmother. And that was a really different set of challenges, because every time I came back, he would have changed really radically in the time that I was gone. And so, it would just be this sort of getting used to it. And she'd go, oh yeah, everything's you've got this dialed in. And she'd be like running out the door. I would be like, okay. And then suddenly, wow, it's really different and really complicated. And that was hard. It was hard to stay in touch with him. I spent a lot of time on the phone sort of going, it's me, hello, and he would kind of put the phone down and I'd hear hammering and he'd be off working on a project or something. And I'd just be like, someone pick up the phone, But it is difficult, I think, in both ways, because you always feel like, even though I'm right here, I'm not doing enough. And then when you go away, you think, oh, I'm not doing enough. You're always missing something. So our entire time, we just kept saying to ourselves and to each other, we're doing all we can do. Yes. All we can do. It's all we can do. And that's literally, it might be nothing. It might be the smallest thing. It's all you can physically, emotionally, mentally do. It's all you can do. And you have to forgive each other, everyone.
Yeah. I wanted to add to that, Tanya. I'm so glad you mentioned it, because it occurred to me, well, early on, but more so after my caregiving was all gone and done with. That adage, failure is not an option. Well, that's BS.
Yeah,
because
always.
Trust me, failure is an option, and it's going to happen. I mean, I think of all the times, and everybody who's listening who has been in this role, however tangentially or otherwise, can think of so many times when you blew it.
Yeah.
Where dad asked the same question over and over again, and I blew my top, and all this kind of thing. And I felt so remorseful. And then an hour later, I said, Dad, I'm so sorry I raised my voice. He said, when did that happen?
Right.
So failure is an option, and it will many times be the only option,
Yeah.
because we're, this is a learn as you go thing. And it doesn't matter if you've had experience professionally or otherwise, it's still learn as you go, because it's your family member.
Yeah.
And, please, everybody who might be still actively in this situation, don't beat yourself up.
No.
Oh, sorry.
Really don't beat yourself up, because failure is going to happen. And guess what? You're going to learn probably more from your failures than all of your successes piled up. So give yourself a break.
Can I
So
just,
true.
can I make a suggestion?
Please do.
I think maybe failure is not a word that we should embrace.
I think so too.
If we could find some other word, like I didn't get that quite right or something like that, because failure is it's a very weighty word, and it's very self-punishing. And listen, if somebody asked you the same question 50 times, I think Gandhi would have lost his patience.
Right.
It's annoying. I mean, and so maybe instead of failure, I was just human in that moment.
Yeah,
I was
right.
human.
Yeah.
And because I think the language that we use for ourselves is very important. I knew someone many, many years ago who said to me, the subconscious has no sense of humor. So if you say something about yourself, even if you're going, oh, I really screwed up, or oh, I'm really a failure there, and you sort of, toss it off like I'm kind of joking around, I'm not like really serious, your subconscious doesn't know that. It goes into the hard drive of your subconscious, failure in red, right? So I think, just being, you're just human. And because, caregiver stress is a very real thing. So to have remorse about things, and to catalog the times that you wish you'd done something different, or you didn't do it as well as you think you did, that adds to stress. And the person with dementia doesn't have any stress. Every moment's new, right? The caregivers are the ones who have stress. I mean, you just described it. You were hanging on to this and you asked your father, I didn't even remember. You probably forgot about it 15 minutes after it happened, right?
Faster.
Or faster. So the caregivers are the ones that have stress. That's why I started a support group program. That's why I wrote this book, because the caregivers are the ones that need help. The one thing about dementia is the people drift off, and they're, for the most part, pretty content where they are.
Yeah.
Right.
The people they leave behind, the caregivers they leave behind, are the ones who are like scrambling all over every single minute and hanging on to it 20 days later, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Good
that's
point.
the value of these books, is that we as caregivers, I feel like you can recognize your behavior, and you can see you have forgiveness for that narrator, because of course you do. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute, I was doing that. I did that. And I just think like every time you read a book, it expands your capacity to love yourself in that moment, which I think is really, I think that's why, in some way, I think I started writing a memoir, because I just needed to see, well, what was happening to me? What was I doing? And can I forgive myself, and can I forgive my family? And how did we all manage this? And I think the more I wrote, the more I just loved everybody, because I was like, whoa, we're really trying our best,
Yeah.
My dad always said, keep the show on the road. That's his favorite to say. And we were like, oh, this thing breaks down. Sometimes we just can't keep it on. We're trying, but it is dilapidated and our tires are flat, and we are trying to keep it rolling, but it is tough. And having some love for yourself and each other in that moment is rough. I apologize for my dogs barking. My phone's away, and now they're
Self-compassion is so very, very needed, and we need to give doses of it.
That's beautiful, Tanya. Those beautiful sentiments. I love that. Now I know that at least two of you have siblings attending this program with you today. And I just wanted to talk about how how it went with your siblings, because Irene, for instance, in her book, it's a novel, and one of the sub-themes is the difficulty between the caregiving sister and the brother who prefers to remain absent. And that's a very, very common issue for many caregivers, where they don't get support from their siblings. And well, we'll start with Irene. How was that with you, Irene? What happened?
Well, first of all, as you mentioned, my book is a novel, so it's fiction. My brother, who is attending today's session, was not the person in my book. But knowing that there is that strife and struggle between siblings, where you're not doing enough, or you think you know it all, or whatever the case may be, I felt it imperative to add that element into my novel. And my novel is a compilation of my own experiences, my brother's experiences, because shortly after my father died, his wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, mixed dementia. So it was a combination of experiences to try to address as many possibilities as possible for someone reading my book. But I think as far as, I mean, it's so, again, I had it easy in that my brother and my sister really did rely on me and trusted me. And that's a big deal, is trust. They trusted me to do what was best for my father. And of course, I always consulted with them. And when I would come back from my visits, I would download with them, but not just the bad stuff, because there's a lot of good stuff, as was mentioned earlier, is to give the highlights too, because they need to have the whole experience. And play on their strengths. If someone doesn't know how to contribute to the situation, play on their strengths. Oh, Sally is really good with figuring out insurance forms and, you know, that kind of thing. Let's get her involved in that. Now she's participating. Or, you know, Jim is really good. He used to be a lawyer. Let me talk to him about this and maybe he can contribute. You know, I mean, just involving them as much as they want to be involved and not guilting them when they can't or choose not to be involved. Yeah. That's, you know, don't create a problem that doesn't have to be there, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's great. Andrea, can you add to that?
Yeah, sure. My sister Liza is here. I don't know if she's actively listening right now. I know she's at work. So I had two sisters, and I think from the start, and even before my father was diagnosed, we were very close. And I think that we shared a lot of our life with each other. And as my dad, you know, progressed, I saw him probably more than my sisters because I lived the closest. Liza did spend a lot of time there though. And my other sister lives out, you know, in Chicago, but we're out in New England. So I think it was just, for me, it was just having their emotional support most of the time. You know, we were lucky enough that, you know, my parents could afford to have private caregivers, and my mom was not working. She was able to care for my father as much as she could. So a lot of that stress wasn't on us as much. So it was just like, I want to, like Irene said, I want to download, you know, I want to tell you my visit. I want to cry. I want to laugh. And then I want you guys to tell me that you understand, and then we can move on, you know. Maybe sometimes we had to help out, you know, whether it was figuring out logistics, and then physically, you know, we started to help out as time went on, but we just had this like flow. And I don't know if it's because there was three of us or because of our personalities just mixed. Liza is a social worker, so she's already got that in her, you know, where she's like, all right, let's chill, you know, like, I don't know, she's had that good background. And then I'm the middle child, so I kind of like to make everybody happy. And then my older sister, Amy, she was sort of like the brains behind everything. You know, she had a PhD in neuroscience, so she would help us in that way. So we just had a great balance. I think we were really lucky. I mean, we still are lucky. My father's, you know, death as well. I think it's just giving each other grace. I said to my mom so many times, I was like, we don't know how to do this. None of us know what we're doing. We just have to take it one day at a time. And really it was one day at a time. Yeah. You know, and I read some of Patty's book today, and it really spoke to me when she said it just felt like we were passing the canteen. We're going up this mountain together, and we're just constantly passing the water to each other, and we're just gonna make it. I don't know how we're gonna do it, but we're gonna do it. And we did it.
Good point. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Does anybody else would have anything to add about siblings?
Well, I just wanted to add that I think people have this hope. I mean, certainly I did. We are a famously not cohesive family. And I certainly had the wish that when my father was diagnosed, we'd all just bond together and be a family. And I think that's a common wish in many people. But the truth of the matter is the homeostasis of your family is what it is. And it's not going to change once dementia comes in. I mean, there might be some situations individually where it does. There might be some miraculous situations out there, but just in general, it doesn't. In fact, it's probably going to be more rooted in what it always has been. Because when tragedy happens, when difficult things happen, people cling to what's familiar to them, right? So if you've always been close, you're going to cling to that. If you've always been distant, that's who you're going to be. I mean, I've had people say to me, well, my brother's not around and he's not showing up. And I would say, well, how was he before dementia entered the picture? Well, he was never around and he never showed up. Right? So where's the surprise? Right? People are going to play the roles that they've always played. Right? You have to kind of know that it's nice to have that wish, but it's probably not going to happen.
Right.
I like Irene's idea of sort of playing to strengths, and finding out like, okay, who can do what, and I think I had always been quite close to my dad and my brother, and my dad were close, and it was sometimes tricky, and but he's a tattoo artist, and for some reason my dad just got really into having tattoos when he was kind of in the throes of dementia, and so my brother would just take him and tattoo anything on him, and they would spend a couple hours together. And dad was at first like, oh, I want to remember this circus poster or this thing, and gradually it was like, I love this, well, this came in the mail today and I love this, and well, let's just put it on, it's just sort of like, and they were like, okay. So by the time he died, he had dozens of tattoos. It was very easy to identify him. But it was really great because it was something that my brother could really, it was a way for them to sit and spend time together. And dad didn't ever sit anywhere. I mean, we were always chasing after him. And this was like a blessing for all of us. So it's these, you don't even know what's going to happen. It's like, well, okay, like that worked for us,
Right.
Yeah.
That's really, that was great. Thanks for sharing that story. We have a few minutes left, so I first wanted to ask, does anybody in the audience have a question or a comment? Just raise your hand. Nicole.
Hi. Sorry I came late to the game.
No worries.
So my mom was diagnosed over a year ago with Alzheimer's, and it was crazy, cross country, all this stuff. But my question is, so I heard a couple of people say, take it one day at a time. And I mean, we were bombarded with this, which I guess everybody is, right? And so I was searching for a book that said, do this first, do this, you need to cover this, so I had to hire an elder care attorney. Luckily my husband's a CPA, my cousin's a wealth advisor, my aunt's a nurse. So like I had to put together this team, but I'm very tenacious and I had family members, but is there a book out there that says, this is what you need to do to hit the ground running with a dementia or Alzheimer's diagnosis? I mean, that's the book I'm still searching for.
We should write one right away.
Mine is.
Well, I'm 40,000 words into my own book about it because I was like, nobody should have to go through this. So
my book is in part a handbook. I mean, it's part memoir, but it's also a handbook because I ran my support group Beyond Alzheimer's for 6 years. So I wanted to break it down and to give you like sort of a linear picture of the disease and what needs to be done. So there are different sections about getting legal help, about taking the car keys away, about what to do when, you know, they wander off, or how to keep that from happening. So it might be beneficial for you.
Okay, is it on the AlzAuthors website? Is that how I get it?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, there's a whole category of caregiver guides in the bookstore. You can
Yeah,
look
but this
that
is,
up.
I mean, I guess, and I'm new to the terminology, but I mean, yes, you're a caregiver. I was a long distance caregiver and then an organizer, but I mean, and caregiver has many facets, I guess, but I was like, yes, well, in my mind, caregiver is someone who's there day to day, unless you're a long distance caregiver, but I didn't know what words to put on it, like an action plan, an Alzheimer's action plan. That's what I was gonna, that's what you need, like,
I
to,
think Patty's book is a great place to start.
Yeah, Patty's book is
Floating
great.
in the deep end would help you a lot.
what is it?
Floating in the deep end.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. No,
Yes.
I mean, well, I mean, I've lived it now for, 15 months, but still, I think,
Yeah.
but thank you. Okay.
Yeah. And I also think that Tammy Anastasia's book might be helpful as well. If you want to say something, Tammy. I see you have the book cover on your photo
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. So my book pretty much walks the side. I write it so that it walks side by side with the caregiver from the beginning all the way to end of life. So it talks about all the cognitive behavioral changes, and then talks about how those changes are going to affect the caregiver, the spouse, the adult child. And then I also have a whole section on questions to ask home care agencies, questions to ask care communities, what to look for when you are shopping around for a care community. So I tried to capture, again, the whole journey from beginning to end. What I did not do is enter territory. Like, I have an emergency plan, all the things you need to consider for emergency plan. And I talk about the POA, the power of attorney for medical and things like that. But I didn't do a deep dive into all the medical or legal, but I give you maybe a kind of a playlist of things you need to do, questions to ask, what to line up. So I help you line up your ducks, what's coming down the pike. And a lot of questions. When do I know when it's time to put my loved one in a care community? Do we put them in a care community? And I address all those questions. And I also provide the answers as to give you a sense as to what you're looking for, and to help you sort out this process. Each one of you are going to be different, but have general information that could be applicable to anybody.
Awesome.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you so much. Anybody else have a question or a comment? Anne, let me unmute you.
Thanks. Yeah, just talking about books, I definitely see the value of really having this library of resources, because some people do want the step-by-step guide. Some people want questions answered. But I think a lot of people don't always realize the value of memoir or even novels, which can sort of tell the story of the journey,
Right.
Without giving you necessarily all the cold, hard facts, which those are very valuable and important too. And I think I know for me, I needed both types of books, but I also leaned towards memoir, because I wanted to know the story of how things unfolded, and I wanted to know I wasn't alone. And maybe that's because I needed the emotional component. But I think everybody's going to need something different, and maybe they will need multiple resources, and that's one of the values of AlzAuthors.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Tammy, you had another comment? We have to wrap up in a minute.
Yeah, and a big part of my book has to deal with how you talk to yourself, the support that you provide for yourself. Talk about caregiver guilt, talking about feeling resentful, talking about the frustration, the grief and the loss, and how to process those emotions, but more importantly, validate. And we were talking about earlier, failure. Mistakes are opportunities to learn from, rephrasing things, how we talk to ourselves about what we do and how we feel. Because everybody is doing the very best they can. And everybody has such a beautiful heart and is so compassionate and is doing everything in their power to take the best care of their loved one. And yet we're going to take that away by what we say to ourselves. So in my book also, I talk a lot about providing compassionate communication with yourself. Any language, the most important language, in my opinion, is what you say to yourself about yourself. And there's so much credit and compassion and love that you've got to give back to yourself for this journey that you're on. Not only are you providing it for your loved one, now you also have to be sure to give it back to yourself.
Exactly. That's been a message, I think, throughout today's program, is loving yourself, giving it back to yourself. That's great. Thank you so much. Did we have any other questions? Are you waving your hand, Carmen?
Carmen and Christine have their hands up.
Okay, so I know some people have to leave at 3. So I just wanted to say, Patty, that was you, right?
Yeah, I do.
Thank you so much for coming. And somebody else had a hard stop at 3? No? Okay. So go ahead, Carmen.
Yeah. Quick comment. I'm a founder of Doggies for Dementia. I know so many of you, many I don't. I've loved this today. I can't wait to share it with our audience. And I really am just always so grateful for the vulnerability and the storytelling. And I mean, that's how we can change the world essentially and make this a more compassionate and beautiful place. And I just wanted to say that I have a book on AlzAuthors also, but I am just never short of being amazed for what y'all are doing. Love your mission. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to jump off. Thank you so much.
Okay, Patty, thanks for joining us today. We love seeing you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, did anybody else have a question or a comment? Christine, you're waving your hand. Okay.
Well, this is our situation. Our house is for sale. We're moving about 100 miles to move in with my mom. She's the last of the 4 parents. And there are concerns that my husband can see before I can see them. And so we're just making the move. And she's already has joked around, oh, here comes my caregiver. Now I've been a hired caregiver for several years, but today really helped me to solidify that I can't just say, I know this, I've got this. It's going to be so different. And so here's my funny question. It would be lovely if someone says, yes, we've got a book for that. How do I navigate this? And here's my willing husband who's saying we'll both move in and we will be there because that's where she wants to be, in her home. How do I not drive my husband crazy? Because he will be the easiest one to go to and go, because I too could come and go, and I still had a lot of emotional attachments to my recipients, but this is gonna be different. So I'm right at the beginning. Has someone addressed that, how it went for their spouse, or how they and their spouse navigated this when they're the one with 60, 70 years of history? And, you know, the son-in-law, he's just always been, oh, you know, my hero, you fixed the faucet, you know, without hard on the husband, I would think. I'm assuming it's going to be hard on him.
I think you're both going to support each other. You know, don't ever sell yourself short. Yes, he might be primary, but I mean, you can provide for him what he cannot provide for himself. He provides for you what he cannot provide, you know. So we talked about the team, the partnership. I guess, don't take too much on. I know you're going to be taking too much on because that's what we do. But just know that you can be a support for each other. And you know your husband, you know when he's depleted, and you'll know when to step in, and he knows when you're depleted, and he'll step in. I cannot emphasize enough how much it's so important to team up and to spot each other throughout the situation. And you're gonna do fine. You're gonna fall short, but you're gonna do fine. Because again, like Patty Davis had said earlier, we're just human.
Yeah.
Mm.
We're human, and that's all we can expect of ourselves.
Mm.
We've already had one conversation. I said, be prepared that there will be times where I will say something that doesn't make sense, like, I need to drive back to the store to make sure that I didn't leave something there. And that's my cue that I probably need to go and just kind of blah, 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 in the car for a little while, and I'll be back. I'll be back.
Yeah. I want to ask Anne and Jean, because they're the curators for the custom caregiver collections. Can you think of a book maybe in this kind of a situation?
Yes, Christine, I just put it in the comments, a book by the name of Every New Day by Dave Muir. And it is a son-in-law who writes this book. And he writes it with humor. And, you know, we think, oh my gosh, a situation like this can't really be humorous. But it is lighthearted, yet so fact-filled. And I think it would help you both.
That's a great suggestion. Just trying to see. Okay. Look at the notes. Anne, did you want to speak? Hold on a second. Let me unmute you.
The book that came to my mind was, I think the name is Bringing Mom Home or something like that. It's not quite the same situation, but there is some similarity in that the author is moving in with the mother, and that it just might provide some insight and some comfort. And it's a memoir.
Yeah, we have several books where the adult child moved back home with the parent. One was The Reluctant Caregiver by Joy Johnston, who was younger, on one of the younger side, I think in her 30s at the time. So that's one that comes to mind for me. But she was single. She wasn't married. But I know that many authors, they have done that journey of, and that uprooting themselves, and then they're faced later on with the task of rebuilding. So I just got an email from someone, it was one of the California authors, and she had moved to California to take care of her mom. And then when I had contacted her the other day, and she said, oh, I had since moved, rebuilt her life elsewhere. So it happens, but it just seems like, so all consuming at the time. You don't think you're ever going to get back to your life.
It's true.
But you do.
Seems impossible.
Yeah. When, it's like people, when is this going to be over? I wish it was over, but it's only going to end one way. And we don't like that way.
Right.
It's not a good way, but sad. Do we have any other questions? This has been a great panel. I'm so glad you guys came.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just have some notes at the end here to share. I want to thank you for attending this event. And we have 2 more scheduled coming up. In September, we're going to do dementia care around the world, featuring authors from different countries talking about their experiences. And that will be eye-opening, because sometimes when we think we have it bad where we are, it's can be far worse in other places. And then in some places it's a lot better. care is more accessible or people have different attitudes. So that ought to be interesting. And then in November, we're doing Dementia with Difficult People, featuring authors who have cared for estranged or abusive parents or have encountered unhelpful family members. And details will be posted on our website. So be sure to subscribe to the website to receive notices of new posts, and go to AlzAuthors.com to stay up to date. Check your inbox each week for our newsletter if you have subscribed, and you can do that on the website. But actually, I think a lot of you are already subscribed, and anyone who isn't will now be subscribed. So you should receive an email every week telling you about the newest author, podcast, special events, and more. And also be sure to visit the blog, the podcast, the bookstore, and shop at our AlzAuthors.com. Shop to find more resources for your dementia journey. You can also follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And always remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
Okay, I'll be sending out the link to the replay in, I don't know, in a week or so. And we'll be sending out the name of the raffle winner, and I have the chat notes and also the infographic when we get that, finish getting that together. All right, so look for that.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure. Thank you. Bye.